The galaxy had always been a place of wonder and mystery, filled with thousands of species, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. Some were known for their intelligence, others for their strength or advanced technology. But there was one species that was often underestimated: the humans, known to many alien races as Deathworlders. They were tough, resilient, and survived in environments that would crush most other species. Little did anyone know that these so-called Deathworlders would be the ones to save the galaxy. The Vesar, a ruthless and technologically advanced alien empire, had been sweeping through the galaxy for years. They conquered planet after planet, destroying civilizations with ease. The Vesar's strength was in their overwhelming numbers and their fearsome weapons, which left no room for resistance. Other species watched in fear as they advanced, knowing that soon they would be next. Many thought that the galaxy had already lost, and it was only a matter of time before the Vesar took complete control. Then the unexpected happened. A small human colony on the edge of the galaxy came under attack by the Vesar. At first, the invaders expected an easy victory. The humans, after all, were a relatively small force, and their technology was no match for the Vesar's advanced weapons. But the humans weren't like the other species the Vesar had crushed. They fought back with a ferocity that shocked the invaders. It started with small hit-and-run attacks. The humans used their knowledge of the planet's terrain to their advantage, setting up traps and ambushes. The Vesar, with all their technology and firepower, couldn't keep up. Every time they thought they had the humans cornered, they would find themselves facing an unexpected resistance. The Deathworlders weren't following any conventional rules of warfare. They were using their environment, their instincts, and their adaptability to fight back. As the days passed, the Vesar grew frustrated. Their soldiers were dying in small skirmishes, and their superior technology didn't seem to give them the edge they were used to. The humans' unpredictability was throwing them off balance. What made this even more shocking was the fact that the humans weren't retreating or waiting for reinforcements. They were taking the fight to the Vesar, showing no fear and no hesitation. Among the human defenders was Captain Raylan, a seasoned military leader known for his calm under pressure. He had seen battles before, but this was different. The Vesar were a terrifying force, and the odds of survival were slim. But Raylan wasn't a man to back down from a challenge. He gathered his troops and formulated a plan that would disrupt the Vesar's strategy. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was bold, and that's what gave them the edge. Raylan's team infiltrated a Vesar supply ship, using only basic tools and their wits to sabotage the ship's engines and weapons systems. It was a dangerous mission, but the humans succeeded, forcing the Vesar to retreat. This was the first time the Vesar had faced a setback of this scale, and it shook them to their core. They hadn't anticipated that the humans would be able to strike back so fiercely and so unexpectedly. Back on the front lines, news of the victory spread quickly. The humans had made a stand, and it had worked. The other alien species, who had been watching from the sidelines, began to take notice. They had long believed that the Vesar were unstoppable, but if the humans could challenge them, maybe there was hope for the rest of the galaxy after all. Among these species was the peaceful Endari, a race known for their intelligence but lacking in physical strength. They had been considering surrendering to the Vesar, but now they were unsure. The humans, who had no grand alliances or superior technology, were holding their ground. How could that be possible? The news spread like wildfire across the galaxy. For the first time in years, the people of the galaxy began to feel a spark of hope. Could the humans really turn the tide against the Vesar? Could they really save the galaxy? But this was just the beginning. The Vesar, though shaken, were not defeated. They would return with greater force, but this time, they would face a galaxy united, with the Deathworlders at the helm. The humans, once seen as outcasts and underdogs, had just shown the galaxy that they were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And as the final countdown began for the Vesar, The galaxy would soon realize that humanity's true strength was not in their weapons or their technology. It was in their will to survive. The small human colony had just pulled off an unexpected victory. The Vreshtar, with their superior technology and ruthless tactics, had been outsmarted and driven back by a handful of Deathworlders. It was a shocking defeat, one that rattled the core of the Vreshtar leadership. They had underestimated humanity, but now they understood one thing for sure: humans were not to be taken lightly. The Vreshtar High Command quickly realized that they needed to adjust their strategy. Instead of continuing the assault on the human colony, they decided to reach out. They had never dealt with a species that could fight back in such an unconventional way, and they were not accustomed to failure. So the Vreshtar chose diplomacy, something they rarely used, but in this case, they hoped it would be the key to avoiding more costly losses. In a move that stunned the galaxy, the Vreshtar sent an emissary to the human colony. Their message was clear. They wanted to negotiate. They offered peace and a chance for the humans to join their empire, promising them resources and protection in exchange for loyalty. It was an offer that, in the past, would have been accepted by many weaker species eager to avoid annihilation. But the humans were not like any other species the Vreshtar had encountered. When the message arrived, it was met with silence. Captain Raylan, the leader of the human forces, gathered his advisors and military commanders. They were wary of the Vreshtar's sudden shift in behavior. Raylan knew that the Vreshtar were cunning and not to be trusted. But he also understood that the galaxy was watching. The humans had made a name for themselves by resisting the Vreshtar, but now they had to decide what to do next. After much debate, Raylan and his team decided to respond, but not in the way the Vreshtar expected. Instead of simply rejecting the offer, the humans proposed a counteroffer. They would help the Vreshtar defeat their enemies, but only if the Vreshtar stopped their invasion of other planets and shared their technology with the human colonies. The humans also made it clear that they would never bow to the Vreshtar, no matter what resources or protection were promised. The Vreshtar were stunned. They had expected humans to surrender or at least agree to become part of their empire. Instead, they were facing a species that was offering a partnership on equal terms. This was not how it was supposed to go. They had expected fear, submission, and obedience. Instead, they faced a challenge that they weren't prepared for: humanity's determination to fight on their own terms. Meanwhile, other species in the galaxy watched in awe. The humans, once considered primitive and weak, were now bargaining with the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Many of the alien species had been following the news from the human colony closely, and they could hardly believe what they were seeing. Could the humans really be this bold? Could they stand up to the Vreshtar and demand respect? The Andari, a peaceful species known for their wisdom, were the first to reach out to the humans. They sent a delegation to offer their support, eager to learn from the Deathworlders and gain insight into their unyielding strength. The Andari had long relied on their intellect and peaceful methods to survive, but they now saw the value in the human approach: resilience, strategy, and the ability to adapt to any situation. The peaceful Zorlan, a species made up of large, slow-moving beings, also sent a representative. Though they were not warriors, they respected the human resolve and wanted to forge an alliance. The Zorlan were a species that valued diplomacy above all, but they knew that sometimes survival meant being able to stand strong in the face of an enemy. As the galaxy's species watched in suspense, the humans remained firm in their stance. They would never join the Vreshtar Empire, but they were willing to work with anyone who was willing to fight for freedom. The Vreshtar, on the other hand, were growing more frustrated by the day. They had expected a quick and easy victory, but instead, they were facing a determined human force that was willing to stand up to them, even if it meant losing everything. Captain Raylan was aware of the risks. He knew that if the Vreshtar didn't accept the human terms, it could mean the beginning of a full-scale war. But he also understood that the galaxy was changing. The humans were no longer just survivors. They were becoming leaders, and with leadership came responsibility. Raylan knew that he could not back down now. He had to stand strong for his people, and for the rest of the galaxy it was beginning to take notice. As the message from the Vreshtar emissary arrived, Raylan stood tall before his team. He looked at each of them, and then, with a steady voice, delivered the final answer. We will not bow to them. We will never surrender. But if they are willing to fight for peace, we will fight alongside them. The message was sent. The galaxy waited in anticipation, not knowing whether peace would come or if the war would escalate. But one thing was certain: humanity was no longer a species that could be ignored. The Deathworlders had made their mark on the galaxy, and the Vreshtar were about to learn just how powerful they truly were. The galaxy held its breath as the Vreshtar deliberated on the humans' unexpected counteroffer. Their emissary had returned with news of humanity's unwavering stance. The Vreshtar High Command was divided. Some wanted to accept the humans' proposal, seeing the potential to use their unique methods in future campaigns. Others, however, saw it as a sign of weakness and were determined to crush humanity's defiance once and for all. The debate continued, but time was running out, and the Vreshtar were growing impatient. Meanwhile, the humans were not waiting idly by. Captain Raylan knew that the Vreshtar would not allow them to stand in peace for long. They were too powerful and too determined. If the humans were going to survive, they needed to make their move. Raylan gathered his commanders for a secret meeting. There was a risk, but Raylan had a plan, one that would strike at the heart of the Vreshtar's operations and demonstrate that humans would never be subjugated. We need to hit them where it hurts, Raylan said, his voice steady but full of determination. The Vreshtar's power lies in their supply lines. If we can take out their key resources, we can cripple their military. It'll show them that they can't just expect to steamroll us. The plan was risky, but the human forces had been honing their skills since the first victory. They had adapted quickly, learning from their early battles, using their environment to outsmart the Vreshtar at every turn. The humans were masters of guerrilla tactics, and Raylan's plan was built around precision and stealth, an attack that would be swift and silent. The target was a massive Vreshtar supply ship, known as the Harak. It was the lifeline for the Vreshtar forces in the sector, supplying them with ammunition, fuel, and advanced weaponry. Without it, the Vreshtar army would be left vulnerable. The ship was heavily guarded, but Raylan's team was used to operating under the radar. They would infiltrate, sabotage, and then disappear into the shadows before the enemy even realized what had happened. The team, led by Raylan himself, boarded a small, unassuming stealth ship. The Silent Arrow was the perfect vessel for this mission. It had been specially designed for covert operations, its advanced cloaking technology allowing it to slip past even the most sophisticated sensors. As they approached the Harak, Raylan's heart raced. The mission was high risk, and failure would mean the loss of many lives. But there was no turning back now. As they neared the supply ship, Raylan gave the order for the team to disembark. Each member of the team was equipped with specialized gear, silent weapons, explosives, and the tools needed to disable the ship's vital systems. The mission was simple: infiltrate the Harak, plant explosives on the critical power systems, and disable its communication array, cutting off its ability to call for reinforcements. Once the mission was complete, the team would retreat to their ship and vanish before the Vreshtar knew what had happened. The humans moved with precision, their training allowing them to navigate the ship's corridors like shadows in the dark. They avoided the guards, using their skills in stealth to remain unseen. Every movement was calculated, every step taken with purpose. Raylan was a master of strategy, and his team trusted him completely. They had trained for moments like this, and now, their skills were about to be put to the ultimate test. As they reached the main power core, Raylan signaled for the explosives to be placed. The countdown began, but just as the team was about to leave, an alarm went off. Someone had spotted them. Raylan's heart pounded in his chest as the enemy scrambled to respond. There was no time to waste now. They had to finish the job and get out, or all would be lost. The team moved faster, the weight of their mission pressing on them. They set the final charges on the power systems and began to retreat. As they ran, Vreshtar soldiers appeared from the shadows, but the humans fought them off with ruthless efficiency. Every shot was precise, every movement fluid. They were not fighting for glory or honor. They were fighting for survival. With moments to spare, the team reached the silent arrow and took off, disappearing into the void of space, just as the Harak erupted in a massive explosion. The blast shook the stars, sending shockwaves across the sector. The Vreshtar had been caught completely off guard. Their supply ship was gone, and with it, their ability to maintain their military presence in the region. The humans watched from a safe distance as the Harak's destruction lit up the dark expanse of space. It was a small victory, but it was a powerful message. The Vreshtar now knew that humanity could strike from anywhere, using methods that were as unpredictable as they were deadly. They had underestimated the Deathworlders, and now they were learning the hard way that humanity was not to be ignored. Back on the human colonies, the news spread quickly. The victory was celebrated, but Raylan knew that this was only the beginning. The Vreshtar would retaliate, and the war would escalate. But the humans were ready. They had shown the galaxy that they were not helpless. They were a force to be reckoned with. The Vreshtar may have thought they had conquered the galaxy, but the Deathworlders had just begun to fight. The destruction of the Vreshtar's Harak had sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The blast was a clear signal to the invaders. Humanity was not a species to be taken lightly. It had been a bold move, one that showed the Vreshtar that humans were willing to fight for their survival, no matter the cost. But as the news spread across the galaxy, a different question began to rise. What made humans so different? What gave them the ability to defy the odds, time and time again? For the other species watching, the answer was becoming clear. It was not just their technology, nor their tactics. It was their spirit. Humans were survivors. They had lived on a death world, a planet filled with dangers that would wipe out most species in an instant. From wild predators to harsh environments, the humans had learned to adapt and thrive in the most challenging conditions. They were a species shaped by struggle, and that gave them an edge that the Vreshtar, with all their advanced technology, couldn't understand. Captain Raylan sat in the command center, reviewing the intelligence reports. His mind raced as he considered the next move. The Vreshtar would soon regroup, and when they did, they would come at the humans harder than before. But Raylan wasn't worried. The victory had shown them something. They weren't just surviving. They were winning. And the more the humans adapted, the more powerful they became. But the Vreshtar weren't foolish. They quickly analyzed their defeat and began to learn. They knew they couldn't rely on brute force alone. If they wanted to crush the humans, they would need to understand what made them tick. They began to study the tactics the humans had used, trying to figure out how they had turned the tide with nothing but their wit and will. Meanwhile, Raylan and his team continued to train. They knew that if the Vreshtar adapted, they would need to stay one step ahead. The humans were not relying on technology alone. They were using their instincts, their creativity, and their ability to think on their feet. Their greatest weapon wasn't the latest gadgets or the most powerful weapons. It was their flexibility. When the Vreshtar came at them with overwhelming force, the humans found ways to outsmart them. When they had the advantage in numbers, the humans found ways to divide and conquer. They learned to exploit the Vreshtar's weaknesses, turning their strengths into liabilities. Raylan knew that his soldiers had an advantage the Vreshtar didn't understand. They weren't bound by rigid tactics or rules. They didn't fight by the book. The humans could adapt in the middle of a battle, shifting strategies based on the situation at hand. It wasn't just about the next move. It was about the ability to change the plan on the fly. The Vreshtar might have the upper hand in terms of technology, but the humans had something far more dangerous: flexibility and ingenuity. On the battlefield, The humans began to demonstrate this in ways that left the Vesar reeling. In one encounter, a group of human soldiers found themselves surrounded by a Vesar battalion. At first, it seemed like they were finished, but instead of charging in blindly, the humans fell back, using the terrain to their advantage. They split into smaller groups, each taking different paths through the dense forest. Using natural camouflage and stealth, they ambushed the Vesar from all sides, picking them off one by one. The Vesar, expecting a traditional confrontation, were caught off guard. The humans had turned the battlefield into a puzzle, and the Vesar couldn't solve it. In another instance, the humans were faced with a heavily fortified Vesar outpost. While other species would have simply launched a direct assault, Raylan decided to take a different approach. Instead of overwhelming the outpost with force, the humans infiltrated the base using a series of clever distractions. They planted false signals to confuse the Vesar, causing them to scatter their forces. Meanwhile, small teams infiltrated the base, taking out key defense systems and sabotaging communications. By the time the Vesar realized what was happening, it was too late. The humans had already neutralized their defenses and destroyed the base from within. It wasn't just the tactics that set the humans apart. It was their ability to inspire others. The galaxy had watched as the humans stood tall against the Vesar, and now other species were starting to take notice. The Andari, who had once believed that intelligence alone could save them, began to incorporate human strategies into their own defenses. The Zorlan, who had always been more diplomatic, started to train their warriors in guerrilla tactics. The other species were learning from the Deathworlders, adopting their strategies and understanding that sometimes strength wasn't about size or firepower. It was about the will to fight and the ability to think outside the box. The Vesar, meanwhile, were growing frustrated. Despite their superior technology, they were losing ground to a species they had once dismissed as primitive. Their initial confidence was beginning to waver, and they could no longer predict the humans' next move. The Vesar tried to adapt, but they were trapped in their own rigidity. The humans, however, were constantly changing, growing stronger and more dangerous with each victory. Back on the human colonies, Raylan stood before his people. The galaxy was watching, and the humans were now the beacon of hope for all those who had suffered under the Vesar's rule. "We are not just fighting for our survival," Raylan said, his voice filled with determination. "We are fighting for everyone who has ever been oppressed, and we will not stop until the Vesar know that they can never break us." The humans had shown the galaxy that it wasn't enough to have advanced technology or overwhelming numbers. To truly win, you needed something more, something that the Vesar could never understand. The will to adapt, to survive, and to fight with everything you had. The war against the Vesar had reached a critical moment. The humans had proven themselves as fierce opponents, and the Vesar had begun to rethink their approach. Despite their advanced technology and overwhelming numbers, they were struggling to maintain control. Captain Raylan's tactics had caught them off guard time and time again. The human strategy was like water flowing around rocks, always adapting, always shifting. The Vesar, bound by rigid systems and their overwhelming pride, found it difficult to keep up. But as the humans continued to strike at the heart of the Vesar Empire, they knew that the time was coming when they would have to face a true test of their resolve. The Vesar were preparing for their next move, a move that would show whether the humans had the strength to keep up their momentum or if they had reached their limit. The Vesar High Command, though frustrated, was not foolish. They knew they could not defeat the humans with brute force alone. The Deathworlders had proven that. They had to find a way to break their spirit. So, they decided to launch an all-out assault on one of humanity's most important colonies, a peaceful world that had been untouched by war. The Vesar thought that by targeting this symbol of human hope, they could crush the morale of the humans and make them realize that no matter how many victories they had won, they could never escape the might of the Vesar Empire. Raylan knew the Vesar would strike soon. The reports from the scouts were clear. The Vreshtar were massing their forces. A massive fleet was approaching the human colony of Zethus, a world known for its lush landscapes, peaceful cities, and vibrant communities. It was one of the few places in the galaxy where humans had been able to live without the constant threat of war. Raylan's mind raced. If they allowed the Vreshtar to take Zethus, it could shatter the morale of the entire human race. There was no time to waste. Raylan immediately called for a war council. His commanders, who had come to trust his judgment completely, gathered in the command center. The room was tense, the weight of the situation heavy on their shoulders. "The Vreshtar are coming for Zethus," Raylan said, his voice calm but firm. "We can't let them take it. If we do, we risk losing everything we'd fought for. This is the time to show them that we will never back down." His words were met with determined nods. The humans had fought for their survival, and they had won against all odds. But this would be the most difficult challenge yet. If they were going to succeed, they would need to use every advantage they had gained over the course of the war. The plan was simple but dangerous. Raylan's forces would launch a diversionary attack against the Vreshtar's main fleet, drawing their attention away from Zethus long enough for the human defenders to prepare. They would need to create confusion, make it appear as though the humans were overextending their resources. Meanwhile, a small team of elite soldiers would infiltrate the Vreshtar fleet, sabotage their command ships, and disable their weapons systems. It was a risky move, but it was the only way to give Zethus a chance to survive. The battle for Zethus began with a series of coordinated attacks. As expected, the Vreshtar fleet was drawn into a fierce engagement with Raylan's forces. The humans were outnumbered, but they used their stealth and adaptability to gain the upper hand. They made hit-and-run strikes, targeting weak points in the Vreshtar's defensive line. Every strike was a message. The humans would never surrender. As the Vreshtar concentrated on the diversion, the elite team, led by Raylan himself, moved into position. The infiltration was a nerve-wracking operation. The team boarded a small stealth ship, cloaking it from the Vreshtar sensors. As they approached the enemy fleet, Raylan's heart raced. The stakes had never been higher. One mistake, and the entire mission could fail. But Raylan was calm. His team had trained for moments like this. They had faced impossible odds before, and they would face them again. They slipped past the Vreshtar defenses, planting explosives on key ships and disabling their engines. As the bombs were set, the team made their escape, retreating back to their ship before the Vreshtar realized what had happened. The sabotage caused chaos within the Vreshtar ranks. Their fleet, once a well-oiled machine, was now a mess of confusion and disarray. The human diversionary attack intensified, and soon the Vreshtar fleet was in full retreat. Back on Zethus, the defenders prepared for the worst. They had seen the signs of the coming assault, and they were ready. When the Vreshtar finally arrived, they found themselves facing an unexpected resistance. Zethus had become a fortress. The humans, working with their allies, had fortified every possible position, creating a maze of defenses that made it nearly impossible for the Vreshtar to gain a foothold. The battle for Zethus raged on for days, but the humans held their ground. They had already learned the Vreshtar's tactics and adapted to them. What the Vreshtar didn't realize was that the humans had been preparing for this moment for months. They knew that the Vreshtar would come, and they were ready to fight with everything they had. By the time the Vreshtar realized they were facing an impossible fight, it was too late. The humans had held Zethus, and the Vreshtar had been forced to retreat. The victory was not only a triumph for humanity, it was a turning point in the war. The Vreshtar had failed to break the human spirit, and now they understood that the Deathworlders were more than just survivors. They were a force to be reckoned with. Raylan stood on the battlefield, watching as the last of the Vreshtar ships flowed into space. His people had fought bravely, and they had won. The war was far from over, but the humans had sent a message to the galaxy. The Vreshtar might be powerful, but they would never defeat the human spirit. The victory at Zethus was celebrated across the human colonies. The Vreshtar, once certain of their dominance, had been forced to retreat in the face of determined human resistance. The battle had been long and brutal, but the humans had held strong, proving once again that they were not just survivors. They were fighters, capable of defying the odds. The news spread like wildfire, and for the first time in a long while, hope began to rise among the galaxy's oppressed species. But Raylan knew that the fight was far from over. The Vreshtar were not a race that easily accepted defeat, and their pride would push them to retaliate. He stood in the command center, reviewing the reports. The human fleet had taken heavy damage during the battle, and the cost of the victory was high. Many lives had been lost, and the resources needed to rebuild and reinforce the fleet would be scarce. The humans had won a crucial battle, but they had also paid a steep price. His thoughts were interrupted as Commander Tessa entered the room, a concerned expression on her face. "Captain, we've received a message from the Andari," she said, handing him a diavad. The Andari, one of the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, had become one of humanity's closest allies after the humans' unexpected victory at the Vreshtar stronghold. Their fleet had arrived just in time to support the defense of Zethus, and their contribution had been invaluable. Raylan read the message carefully. It was an offer for a strategic alliance, one that would provide humanity with advanced technology, medical supplies, and reinforcements for the coming battles. It was a generous offer, and Raylan knew it would help the humans rebuild and strengthen their position. But as he finished reading, a sinking feeling settled in his chest. The Andari were offering their help, but they also wanted something in return. They were asking for a share of control over the human colonies, a say in the decisions that would shape the future of the war. Raylan's brow furrowed. He had never trusted politicians, and he had seen too many alliances fall apart because of hidden agendas. The Andari were offering help, but it came at a price. He didn't want to sacrifice humanity's independence. Not now, not when they had fought so hard to gain it. But he also knew that the war was far from won, and the Vreshtar would not give up easily. The question was, could humanity afford to turn down the Andari's offer, or would it be necessary to accept their terms in order to survive? Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the situation was becoming more complicated. The Vreshtar, though wounded, were regrouping. Their losses at Zethus had been significant, but they were far from defeated. Raylan had heard whispers of a new weapon being developed by the Vreshtar, something that could change the course of the war. He couldn't afford to ignore the possibility. If the Vreshtar unleashed this new weapon, it could spell disaster for humanity and their allies. The human fleet, though strong, was in no position to take on a new Vreshtar weapon of unknown power. The resources needed to repair and reinforce their ships were limited, and the human colonies were already stretched thin. Raylan had to make a choice. Would he focus on rebuilding the fleet and preparing for the Vreshtar's next move, or would he try to strike at the heart of the Vreshtar's new weapon before it could be deployed? The decision weighed heavily on him, but Raylan knew there was no easy answer. Every choice carried consequences, and the stakes were higher than ever. The humans had proven that they could hold their ground against the Vreshtar, but the cost of victory was mounting. Lives were being lost, resources were dwindling, and the pressure to succeed was growing. It was then that Lieutenant Mara, one of Raylan's most trusted officers, entered the room. "Captain, we've detected an unusual energy signature near the Vreshtar homeworld," she reported. "It matches the readings we received before the attack on Zethus. It could be their new weapon." Raylan's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The Vreshtar were making their move. "Prepare the fleet," he said quickly. "We're going to hit them before they can use that weapon." But as Raylan turned to leave, he paused. He had just received word from the Andari. They had a fleet ready to support the humans, but they expected the same in return. They wanted a greater say in the direction of the war. Raylan hesitated. The Andari had been invaluable allies, but what would they ask for next? Was this the price of victory, the loss of humanity's independence? "I need to think about this," he muttered, running his fingers through his hair. Mara gave him a solemn nod. "We're ready when you are, Captain." Raylan took a deep breath. The weight of the decision was unbearable. If they didn't act quickly, the Vreshtar's new weapon would be their undoing. But at what cost? Would accepting the Andari's terms help humanity in the short term, or would it compromise their future? As Raylan looked out at the stars, the full weight of the responsibility pressed down on him. The future of humanity and the fate of the galaxy rested on his shoulders. Every decision he made would have lasting consequences. The humans had already proven that they could win battles, but now they had to prove that they could win the war, not just with weapons, but with the strength to make the right choices when it mattered most. The war had dragged on for years. Humanity had proven itself time and time again, against overwhelming odds. But as the final battle loomed on the horizon, the reality of their situation weighed heavily on Captain Raylan. The Vreshtar were regrouping, stronger than before, and their new weapon was nearing completion. Humanity had gained allies, but every decision seemed to come with a cost. The question on everyone's mind was whether they could still stand alone, or if they would need to rely on their uneasy alliances to win the war. Raylan stood on the bridge of his flagship, gazing out at the vast expanse of space. The stars seemed so distant, like a reminder of the hope they all once had. A few years ago, the idea that humanity could unite the galaxy seemed impossible. But now, they were on the brink of something much larger, something that could change the future forever. Yet that same hope seemed to come with strings attached. The Andari had been invaluable allies, but their demands were becoming harder to ignore. They wanted a greater influence in the war's decisions, a voice in humanity's future. The question echoed in Raylan's mind. Should he accept the Andari's terms, or risk facing the Vreshtar alone? The crew moved around him, focused on their tasks, but Raylan could feel their eyes occasionally flicker his way. They were waiting for his decision. He had led them through the darkest times, but this time, the choice seemed impossible. Lieutenant Mara stepped forward, her voice steady. "Captain, we've received the latest report on the Vreshtar's weapon. It's almost operational. We don't have much time." Raylan nodded grimly. Time was always the enemy. They couldn't afford to waste it. Not now. How soon until it's ready for deployment? "Less than a week," Mara replied. "If we don't strike first, they'll use it." A silence fell over the bridge. The pressure to act was mounting. Raylan turned back to the viewport, his mind racing. The Vreshtar's new weapon had the potential to destroy entire fleets with a single strike. Humanity had been fighting against their might for years, but this new weapon could end it all. They had to stop it before it was used, but the cost of attacking the Vreshtar homeworld would be immense. "Prepare the fleet," Raylan ordered. "We're going to destroy that weapon before it can be used." His voice was resolute, but deep inside, doubt lingered. This attack would be the final push. If they failed, the Vreshtar would wipe them out. If they succeeded, it could end the war in humanity's favor. But what if it wasn't enough? What if the Vreshtar had something even more devastating hidden away? As the fleet prepared for the assault, Raylan made his way to the command room. There, his most trusted officers gathered. The plan was clear. They would strike fast, hit the Vreshtar homeworld with all their force, and destroy the weapon before it could be activated. The humans had learned to use their strengths, stealth, adaptability, and the element of surprise, so they would move in swiftly, striking at the heart of the enemy. Commander Tessa stood beside Raylan, her expression stern. "We've worked with the Andari to create a joint strategy. They're ready to send reinforcements if we need them." Raylan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The Andari's help was appreciated, but what if they had their own agenda? What if, by accepting their help, humanity was putting itself at risk, losing its independence in the process? "We're ready to go," Tessa said, her voice firm. Raylan took a deep breath. This was it, the final step. The Vreshtar's weapon had to be destroyed, or humanity's future would be shattered. But the thought of relying too heavily on the Andari, on anyone, made him uneasy. Humanity had always fought alone, Could they maintain their freedom, or would they become pawns in a larger game? "Proceed with the attack," Raylan ordered. The fleet surged forward, racing toward the Fresh Tar homeworld. The final battle was about to begin. The attack on the Fresh Tar homeworld was swift and brutal. As the human fleet engaged the Fresh Tar's defenses, Raylan watched from his flagship, his heart pounding. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment that could determine the fate of humanity and the galaxy. The Fresh Tar's defenses were strong, but the humans had learned their tactics and adapted. They fought with an urgency that came from years of survival, from knowing that there would be no second chances. The Fresh Tar tried to fight back, but the humans were everywhere, striking, retreating, and striking again. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Raylan knew that the Fresh Tar were running out of time. The weapon had to be destroyed, or everything they had fought for would be lost. As the battle raged on, Raylan received a transmission from the Andari. "We're sending reinforcements," the voice said, "but we need your word on the Alliance. Our offer stands. Humanity's future, shared." Raylan paused. The words hit him like a blow. The Andari's terms were clear. They wanted more power, more influence. Could he really accept their offer? Could he sacrifice humanity's independence for the sake of survival? In that moment, Raylan made his decision. "No," he said firmly. "We'll fight this battle alone." The Andari were silent for a moment, and then the transmission ended. With that, Raylan focused on the task at hand. The Fresh Tar's weapon was just ahead. His fleet fought with everything they had, and soon they'd found the weapon's core. The humans unleashed everything they had, targeting the weapon's power source. The explosion that followed was massive, sending shockwaves throughout the battlefield. The Fresh Tar were reeling. Without their new weapon, they were vulnerable. Raylan knew this was their moment. With the weapon destroyed, the Fresh Tar's strength was shattered. The final blow would soon come. As Raylan looked out at the victorious fleet, he realized that the decision he had made was not just about the battle. It was about humanity's future. They had won, but they had done so on their own terms. Humanity's strength lay not just in their ability to fight, but in their ability to choose their own destiny. And in that moment, Raylan knew that humanity had proven something that no weapon could ever destroy: their will to survive and their ability to choose their own path.